you, Elena. Good morning, everyone. And I want to say thank you for allowing me to participate in this conference today, the final conference of the OPTIMISM project. Thank you, Elena. Thank you to the entire project. I have not been following this project very closely, even though I do follow a lot of European research, so I'm looking forward to hearing the presentations today. I will be moderating the two panel sessions, but before I begin, let me just make a couple remarks. As Elena mentioned, I am a journalist, so I try to keep up with what's going on in the world, and I have a couple of points I'd like to share with you before I introduce our speakers and panelists. This week is European Mobility Week, and many of you probably already know that. European Mobility Week being an annual campaign on sustainable urban mobility. It is sponsored by the EC's DG Environment and Transport. Around 2,000 cities in 43 countries are expected to take part in this year. There is an award also coming up, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan Award. The EC earlier this month launched its second annual Urban Mobility Plan Award, in case you're interested in that. This year it's focusing on balancing economic and social issues with environmental concerns in a pragmatic way, which sounds very much about what Optimism is focusing on. Last year's award, by the way, went to Aberdeen, Scotland. And finally, I'll just mention that the UK is holding its 4th annual National Sustainable Transport Conference on October 3rd. So that's coming up next month for any of you who might be interested in that. Now, a little bit of context for what we're about to begin discussing. Just last week, the European Parliament, as you may know, adopted a resolution on transport technology affecting sustainable mobility. It was addressing communication issued exactly a year ago by the European Commission, taking stock of efforts to implement proposals that were in the famous white paper launched in 2011, white paper on transport. And in this resolution, rather in the white paper, it's recognized that the additional investment that is needed to achieve just the emission reduction goals for the European transport system, it's estimated at €1 trillion between 2010 and 2030. That's roughly, this is just for context, roughly the same as EU households spend on transport in 1 year. $1 trillion, that's, many of you I'm sure know a lot more about that than I do, but I found that quite interesting. Now the communication and the resolution, they describe the EC's 2011 white paper on transport as ambitious, and I think there's good reason to call it that. The 2050 goals associated with that include no more, this is again quoting from the white paper from 2011, by 2050, the key goals, I'm just going to mention 3. One is that there would be no more conventionally fueled cars in cities, which is, I think, indeed a worthy but ambitious goal. Or they would like to see a 50% shift in medium-distance intercity passenger and freight journeys from road to rail and waterborne transport. So a 50% shift there, and of course a 60% cut in transport emissions. So that's just a little bit of context for what we're going to be discussing now. We have an hour and a half for this session. We will begin with a series of presentations. There will be 4 presentations, and then the speakers from those presentations and 2 others from the project will join me for a discussion. We'll have some questions and answers on stage, some discussion, and then we hope to still have time to take questions from the audience. So instead of having you all come up at one time and having to turn your head to look at the presentations, I'm just going to ask you to come up individually to give your presentations, and then when the 4 presentations are over, we can all gather here. The first presentation for this session is from Wanda Debauche. She is Head of Division Mobility, Safety and Road Management at the Belgian Road Research Center. The title of her presentation, Sustainable Mobility, You Can Get What You Want If. And we're going to find out what that is.
Thank you, Terry. Good morning, everybody. I would like to thank the organizers to give me the opportunity to take the floor today and to speak about sustainable mobility. And as Terry mentioned, the most important word in my title presentation is the if. So because I have only 15 minutes, I would like to start with maybe not the conclusion, but the three main important things I have to mention, and maybe the three conditions to answer to the if of the sentence. First, I think that understanding mobility and acting on it require a keen interest on its foundation and its motivation. Two, mobility is becoming more and more complex, and so does the world in which it develops. And the third point is that to be effective, any mobility and transport policy must act on the three components of a transport system. That means on human behavior, on vehicle, and on infrastructure and environment. So, what are the main challenges we are facing to? We all know about problem on pressure on environment, especially with pollutant emission and noise, shortage of resources. But in parallel, we have social and demographic changes as well, and huge changes in technology. No, technology is not for me, as you see. Okay, what about social and demographic changes? Maybe a very important point is the increase of population, especially in urban cities, urban area. We know that today about 75% of people are living in cities, but tomorrow this percentage is expected to increase to 85% by 2050. So the pressure in the urban area will increase. Yeah. An important thing is the generation, what I call the generation effects. That means that with new generation you have new living style, new mobility habits. And we know that demographic trends in Europe show that there is an increasing in life expectancy. So we live older, and seniors are becoming more mobile than in the past. Here you have a table with a comparison with all the different generations with their habits, lifestyle, and the consequence for the mobility. As you probably know, we are now with the C generation, C for connected. That means that this generation like to own in cities. For them, it's not important. They don't attach very important to the ownership of a car. They don't attach importance to the working hour, but they want to be connected every day, everywhere. So that means that new working habits appear, like the liberalization of working hours and conditions, for instance, or home satellites as well. Another point in the context is, of course, the large improvement in fuel consumption and vehicle, with a large diversity of vehicles running with unconventional fuels. But we know that we have still some doubt about this alternative vehicle and alternative fuel, especially with biofuel. Another point is the connectivity of the society now, with a very large range of online services, which are now for everybody, available for everybody. And as I mentioned before, the C generation want the world in his pocket, with the huge changes, of course, with the consumer attitude, and with consequence in transport and mobility as well. What is the shape of future passenger transport? What will be the mobility requirements of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in the future? We know that the transport demand still continue to grow. I know that you have some doubt about the prediction, so am I, but all the prediction seems to agree that the transport demand will still continue to grow. As you see on the slide, both for passenger and for goods. In this context, it seems that the car will remain the major transport mode, but the attitude regarding the car, the use of the car, seems to be a little bit different. It seems that in the statistics in Europe and in other countries as well, the use of the car seems to reach a threshold. But the question is this threshold an epiphenomenon or real a long-term trend? So, what could bring ICT in this context? Of course, ICT technology should contribute to a smarter, cleaner, and safer passenger transport, but therefore there are conditions as well. For instance, ICT in travel demand information could be benefit for all users if we move from a static system to a real dynamic system with real-time information system. If we move to a separate transport mode to a multimodal approach, a real multimodal approach, and if you can move from display for all information to a real customized system. As I mentioned before, the elderly people are becoming more important. So I think that we should pay attention for this kind of user with specific requirements. ICT could contribute to mobility services, new mobility services. Of course, we have to move from single mode to real multimodal approach and multimodal system. And as I mentioned before as well, I think that we are moving from the ownership to the use of the mode. And as you see on the slide, there are new services and business models which emerge with this notion of not ownership but use. So for the C generation especially, it's no more important to get a car. What is important is to use the car. So I use a car only when I need it, on demand, and there is no need to have it sleeping in my garage. So that means that new services are coming. ICT could contribute in traffic management as well, but therefore we have to move from a standalone system to a real cooperative system between all the different operators. And we have all the technology available to have communication infrastructure to infrastructure, vehicle to infrastructure, of vehicle to vehicle. ICT with vehicles, we have expectation or maybe fear about autonomous vehicle. Yes, indeed, the technology is available, but questions still remains, especially about road safety. So, how to make that all efficient? As I told you, we have to act on the three components of the transport system. That means on technologies, on human factors, but on environment and physical factors as well. I think we have to anticipate more. Therefore, we need research. Anticipate. Why? Because, as I told you, exogenous factors will influence the mobility of the future. And here I put a photograph of a picture of the 3D printer, because I think that this kind of new technology could influence, of course, the distribution and logistics of tomorrow, but that means freight transport as well. So I think that for the researcher, it's very important to look maybe a little bit further, a little bit broader, and to anticipate more about this kind of exogenous factors. We have to innovate. Here you have a picture of Eiffage Group in France, which create a think tank working group called Phosphor, and they have to imagine what are going to be the cities of tomorrow with the vehicle, but with infrastructure as well. So we have to innovate in infrastructure. We have to innovate. Okay. We have to innovate with infrastructure. I think an important point about infrastructure, I mentioned the pressure in urban area. And so I think that in urban area, we know that the public space should be redesigned. I mean that we know that the urban sprawl is not a solution. We have to look rather for more compactness. And so I think that the use of public space should regularly change regarding the different requirements of all the road users. That means that you can imagine a more chronotopic use of the space, changing depending on all the road users. You have to innovate in vehicles, but of course there are a lot of questions regarding this kind of new vehicles and the place of these kinds of vehicles on the infrastructure, especially with road safety. And I think we have to innovate in management and funding as well, with for sure a greater coordination of all authorities between the public and the private sector. We have to set up and to develop a real evaluation culture, because money is we have a shortage of fund and money, so we have to prioritize our investment, and therefore we have to set up an evaluation culture, and we have to look to new ways of funding as well. I think we have to encourage as well, for change of behavior. And here I place a picture of illustrating home working. And I think it's very illustrative, because for home working, you have to convince the employee, but you have to convince the employer as well, because your management way have to change with home working. So to encourage this kind of behavior is a task we have to do as well. And the last point, I think we have maybe to control as well, and especially about the price of transport. I think that it's a determined factor as well. And maybe we don't have to tax more, but we have to tax better. So keep optimist, and if you can answer to all these conditions, you can get the sustainable mobility you want. Thank you.